Today I have with me the president of Solutions Barbados, Mr. Grenville Phillips. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. As the president of Solutions Barbados, we're going to be taking a look back at government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and coming forward. So to start our interview, I'll ask you the question, what is the position of Solutions Barbados as it relates to how do you guys think that government would have handled this particular response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, well, first we must be thankful because we have come out of this a lot better than a lot of other countries. We do have high incidence, we do have a number of deaths. That's very unfortunate. But when you compare what other countries have gone through, we could only be thankful. So thank God, and we thank the administration. We thank every public servant, every public worker who worked, everyone that stayed home. We thank everyone. So well done, Barbados. The purpose of, I guess, an opposition party, or a party that's not in government, is to give some kind of forensic critique of the government. Could the policies have been better? Now, this is not like hindsight. If it's hindsight, then there should be no criticism at all. It should simply be, well, if it happens again, this is what we should be doing. But it's not hindsight, because from the very beginning, we tried to offer our best advice. And time after time, it just was ignored, I should say. When we had no cases, it was important that we restrict who comes into Barbados. It just makes sense. We were one of the very few countries that had no cases whatsoever. And so we pleaded with the government, please don't treat our border so carelessly. Let's protect our wicket. Let's restrict, at least test them if they're coming in, test them. If they're not being tested, then restrict them, don't let them come in. And that was ignored. We were told that we must keep it open for the tourism sector. And then when that started to fall and we started to get cases, and we pleaded again, let's pay some attention to our borders. We are treating them too carelessly. All of the political operatives started this campaign that it makes no sense to close our borders to cargo. No one was talking about cargo. No one on this planet was talking about cargo. The only people that were talking about cargo are political operatives trying to deflect the real question of why are we allowing people to come in with no restrictions whatsoever. But yet they kept talking about cargo all the time. So we just, that's why it's not hindsight. It was foreseen, and we kept talking about it, and things weren't done. Eventually, things were done very late. Eventually, they paid attention to restricting the travelers. They waited, no, until we had about 45 or so. We waited late, over 40 cases. They waited, and then finally, we had the shutdown. After about 2 weeks, we got the expected flattening of the curve. So it worked. So we could have opened the economy by about the 19th of April, because we had dedicated a consistent flat curve. But instead of that, we decided to have another 2 week or more than 2 week shutdown. So that was, I think, unnecessary. We could have opened the economy up 2 weeks ago. So I guess the real problem, the root of the problem, is that the government comes up with plans, and rather than sharing the plans with the stakeholders so that they can get some critical review of those plans, and therefore the glaring errors in the plans could be updated or could be eliminated, could be addressed. What happened is that every draft plan got implemented. you do not implement draft plans. You must expose the plans to rigorous scrutiny. And then after addressing the feedback, then you implement those plans, but not the first draft. And what happened was at every step, we kept on implementing draft plans with not the best consequences.
So what I asked you, Mr. Phillips, then is that the government, I remember particularly when the Prime Minister addressed, when she was outlining the stimulus package, and even before then in previous addresses, the Prime Minister would have indicated that on every occasion there was a lot of meetings with the stakeholders in the business sector and the private sector, and also in the public sector as it relates to, and also medical officials before rolling out a plan. And you just mentioned in terms of engagement of stakeholders. So do you think then that it is only the government to blame, or everyone who they would have engaged with? Because they did say that they had a lot of engagement.
Because we were never contacted, and even though we kept giving unsolicited advice, it was not taken. But we were never contacted. I checked with the UPP, and they said they were never contacted either. So I don't know who she was contacting. Now, that's why it's very important to have persons rigorously scrutinize plans. That's what he said. So,
if I'm getting it correctly, on a number of the things that government would have done in terms of projects would have been good in your party's eyes, but you're questioning the background process behind it as it relates to things like tendering, or it relates to things like engagement. So the ideas were good, but the follow through, or the back room, the back processes were what of concern to you, if that's what I'm getting from what.
Yes, I understand. That's correct. We support the Harrison Point upgrade because we didn't know it was coming. We fully support that upgrade, but we disagree with the procurement process, because suppose it only costs $5 million, right? Why are we paying 30 million? Or suppose it costs 20 million, why are we paying 75 million? So it's that we keep paying too much. And since we have to then increase taxes to pay for those things, it is the poor that suffer the greatest. They have to pay the increased VAT. They have to pay the increased land tax and other taxes. So that's what we're disappointed with. Now, as far as it comes to the catastrophe fund, I think that is a grave error. Dr. Maskell, God bless him, he went to the same school as me. I was with him there at Commonwealth School. But he came on to brass tacks and spent 3 hours and just did not answer any of our concerns, not a single one of our concerns. Every time one of the consultants or one of the ministers in the Ministry of Finance talk about this disaster clause in our contracts, the story seems to keep changing. The last change was, like the Prime Minister said, that it would be triggered if we get a tropical storm, and Dr. Maskell said that it will be triggered if we get a hurricane. There's a big difference. So which is it? And also, what's the speed? What's the wind speed that triggers it? Or is it triggered based on wind speed? Or is it triggered based on sustained wind speeds or gust wind speeds? No, it's usually the gusts that cause the most damage. So it will be useful to know, is it the gust or is it the sustained wind speed? If it's a sustained wind speed, it means that we have a lot of protection. If it's the gusts, it means we have a lot less protection. Or is it the barometric pressure? What is it? We don't know. Apparently this thing is such a big secret that they cannot tell us what this clause is. We just get little snippets here and there, and then depending on who's talking, someone contradicts someone else. So it'll be useful to see this clause for ourselves. Also, where is it measured? Is it measured on land? Is the wind measured in our sea exclusive economic zone, which usually extends out over 100 kilometers? Or is it measured at the eye wall? Or if it's not an eye, at the center of the weather system, which may be 50 kilometers outside of Barbados. I mean, where is this thing measured? That's why it's useful to see the clause itself. Now, what we're really concerned about is that the government said that because they have a disaster clause, it unlocks $1.7 billion of funds because they wouldn't have to pay these funds. The payments will be delayed. Some say suspended, some say delayed. So what we'd like to know is that, all right, after the 2 years, must we pay the money immediately? If so, then we better not spend it. We better hold it and then give it to our creditors. Or if we happen to pay, let's say a hurricane was coming this year, but we didn't know. So this year we went and took the funds and we paid our creditors. 1 week later, we are hit by a severe hurricane. Therefore, all the money for year one is already gone. We've already paid it to our creditors. So we only have money for year two. The money for year two will come from revenues from year one. So if we got hit by a hurricane this year, a lot of businesses will not be making a lot of payments. There won't be much revenues for the government, and therefore there won't be this $1.7 billion that Dr. Maskell is talking about. So he needs to answer these questions. But so far, he just would not answer important questions. As I said, he was on brass tacks for 3 hours and did not answer a single important question.
I'll also want to get from you, what are your thoughts as it relates to the setting up of the Job and Investment Council, which features some prominent members, former prime ministers and ministers of finance, the Honorable Oinatha and Chris Sinclair. What are your thoughts as it relates to the setting up of that Job and Investment Council?
I support it. There should always be some institutional memory for another administration. We had recommended strongly that every minister of government should have an advisory council. But we recognize the Barbados that we live in. And therefore, there should be two councils that they should have, or two advisory committees that they should have. One, a political advisory committee, so that those who expect rewards because their party got in, let them sit on that committee. But then there should be a technical advisory committee where some of outstanding persons in Barbados who understand the various matters, they should be invited then to the technical advisory committee. And you should not be paid to sit on that committee. You should volunteer. That's fully volunteer. You can pay the political advisory committee because they expect, their berries. They expect some room at the trough. So yes, pay them. But for the technical advisory committee, those should not be paid. And I've sat on quite a few technical advisory committees and I was never paid because you're just looking for senior persons in their professions and you want their best advice. So I agree with the setting up of this committee, and I wish that every single minister would also have a technical advisory committee to advise them. My only concern, if I can mention it, is once this committee has done some work and produced a deliverable, they've produced something, some plan, please don't take that first plan, that first draft, and implement it. Share it, right? Share it, put it on some website somewhere, and allow persons like myself and others to go and look at it and give our best advice, give feedback. And they don't have to take the advice, but at least they got it. And then they're free to accept it or they're free to reject it. But at least they would have had some advice and they could then consider it and decide what they want to do with it so that it can only improve the plan. It could only improve the first draft plan. And that then would benefit all of us. So I encourage them to keep meeting, but don't just take their plan and just give it to the government for implementation. Release it for scrutiny. And if, when persons are examining the plan, um, they have some disagreements, that's a good thing. It's always good to get a second opinion, especially if it disagrees with your initial opinion. That can only benefit the stakeholders. So yes, some will want to take it and use it politically, and that's part of the job description. That comes with it. So don't worry about that. Simply receive the comments and consider them for the benefit of all Barbados.
And I'll also ask you, as we start to wrap up, as it relates to the education system now, education has been pushed in the direction of online. The school term would have started on May 4th, and there was a call for some tablets and so on for people who would be less fortunate or wouldn't be able to access the online education. What is the party's position as it relates to how the entire matter of education and the move to online education has been handled by this administration?
Right. Well, we decided very early, as soon as the elections were finished, that we would not be nipping at the government's heels. We would not be making a nuisance of ourselves. We would just give them our best advice. And if we thought that they were going down a wrong road, well, we will try to respectfully and politely let them know we disagree with that road, and this is why, and these are the foreseen consequences of going down that road. Education was really dear to us. Um, it is perhaps the failure of our educational system is a reason why we have so many social problems. It's a reason why so many people find themselves in our prisons. Um, we waste so much potential because of our educational system. And therefore, we had hoped that there would be a modification of the educational system. And we put all that on our website, solutionsbarbados.com, our educational plan, because we think it's critical that every person leaves school with a marketable skill. They should know how to develop products, market products, especially on the internet, so that they have billions of people in their market rather than the small Barbados market or even the Caribbean market. We have the most beneficial double taxation agreement within the United States of America. It is as if we get the benefits of being US citizens without being in the US. It is why we are not taking advantage of that is a great mystery. So every Barbadian family should have a product on the internet that they are marketing to people in the US and in the other countries where we have favorable double taxation agreements. We are squandering this opportunity. And I did my best, and I gave my best advice to the government, but they are just continuing with their method, unfortunately. And therefore, we keep getting people, a large percentage of people coming out of school with no evidence of having attended regarding certificates. So it's a failing system, but it needs to be improved. And it can easily be improved, very easy, by teaching the practical parts of subjects before you teach the theoretical parts. Because our system right now is teach the theoretical part, which is a lot more difficult. That weeds out a lot of people that just can't get it or won't get it because they're not mature enough. And therefore, when the easier practical parts come, they've already been so discouraged that they don't pursue it. And that's evidence in their marks, in their results. So that needs to change. So we're not saying add anything to the curriculum, really. We're just saying rearrange it. Teach the practical things first. Therefore, it's a lot of fun learning. And then in the later years, teach the more challenging theoretical parts. And the persons then would have had enough excitement at learning and enough encouragement at learning that they will then put in the discipline required to learn the more difficult theoretical parts. And really, it won't be that difficult because they've already had practical experience in it. So it just it's to me lunacy that we are continuing with the same educational curriculum in the secondary schools. And again, this is not hindsight. This is foreseen, and we've allowed this thing now for about 40 years. 40 years of failure, proven failure, and yet we continue with it. So I'm very disappointed. I must say, I'm very, very disappointed with at least that ministry, because we laid out the plan, we showed them what they can do, offer to do it for free, and yet we just continuing with the same bad system. So yeah, we putting tablets in their hands, but we are using the same bad curriculum. So we shouldn't expect any different result for the students, which
And
means a lot of discouraged students who leave school thinking that they can't do anything, and therefore they're not aiming for anything high. They're aiming for very, very, very low achievements, and
and
that's our fault. Sorry, go ahead.
and finally, Mr. Phillips, just to ask, what coming out of COVID-19, what is your party's vision for Barbados as we emerge from this pandemic, as we begin to reopen the country? What is your party's goal or vision for the country?
Yes, our vision is that every Barbadian could be wealthy, very healthy, and well educated if they choose to be. And therefore, everything should be provided in that regard. Um, we are an island, and therefore we have full control of our borders. And therefore, any COVID cases that we get, that is within our control. We started out, sorry to go back here, but we started out with models, and there were persons boasting about the models that they had, and they were advising the government with their models. And just from listening to them and getting a little bit of information from them, I recognize their models are flawed, and therefore expose them to scrutiny, because if you're making decisions that are going to affect me and others based on your models, then release them so that I can take a look at them. Their models did not assume an island. Their models assumed, it seemed, some European country or US state or Canadian province or something, not a place that had full control of its borders. And therefore, those models were used to advise the government. And here we are, after a week of unnecessary lockdown. And it really was, the entire lockdown was unnecessary, because had we been more careful and less careless with our borders, we would not have had many cases. We would have nipped it in the bud. But as I said, we were very, very careless with our borders. And then certain persons who were very influential started to change the conversation and talk about cargo rather than people. And no one was disagreeing with allowing cargo to come in. But it was ludicrous to have this very contagious disease and keep our borders open, unrestricted to human travelers. That made no sense at all. So our vision for Barbados is we all prosper. Every household prospers. Every household has internet-based business where they're receiving foreign currency payments, so that they are not vulnerable to devaluation. And even though you may say, well, there's no devaluation now, yes, but we're talking about for future administrations. We want Barbadian households, regardless of what administration is in power, not to be vulnerable to having their salaries cut, to having their income cut because they earn in foreign currency. And they should be healthy. And therefore, all taxes on healthy food should be zero. Once it's a whole food, fruit, vegetable, there should be no taxes on those or any imports of those. If you want to tax the unhealthy foods, the high sugar, the high salt, the high fat, the preservative type foods. Those are what you tax, but you should not tax, and therefore you encourage the eating of healthy foods. And properly manage every public service, and there is an international management standard. I got to mention it, the ISO 9001 quality management standard. That's the international standard of management, and therefore that benefits employees of the government and their customers, the public.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Phillips, for coming on and sharing your thoughts as it relates to some of the policies that we would have seen in COVID-19 and sharing your party's vision for the way in which we want to see Barbados go